the second largest. The flood itself was a problem, but because of the fake news, everything was disturbed. And that was some kind of a huge issue for people here. Learn from failures. Do you know why the city was not affected? When we have this problem in 1957, we made a new riverbed, which is the one on the right side. That's outside the city. The old river, if you have the opportunity to work in Valencia, it's a beautiful garden, 8 kilometers. It's a super beautiful area. And we made this new riverbed, which have been doing nothing for many, many years. In fact, people was pushing hard in order to do something in there. You see the picture about the work that riverbed made by the time of the flood. So we fixed it. We learned from experience, and we became better by developing solutions. Working together, it's always important, but coordinated. At the very beginning, you see how many people moving into the area to help, but in reality, it was very difficult at the beginning because you need somebody, as in education, coordinating or taking the lead, because these people, they need tools. They need to be assigned to specific tasks. Sending people by itself, it's not enough. And the most important thing about resilience and tenacity, we need to move forward independently of how big is the challenge, as we did. So that's what happened for you to know and become familiar. So remember, you are here today, and we want this to be like a turning point. Each of you here represents a country, a reality, a unique context. And we have all together, we are connected because we have a common goal, which is give next generation of education, of students, the education they need, the education they deserve. Because remember, some of the problems they will be facing, we created them. So we have the responsibility now to provide the tools to these people so they can address, so they can fix the problems that we created. So this is not just about debating ideas, this is a call for action. Okay? You are the leaders, you are the visionaries, you are the architects, and you are here today to do the job. So welcome, and sorry again for the technical issue. So now it's the time of Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller is a professor of psychological science and president distinguished teaching fellow at the Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona, US. Dr. Michelle Miller is a cognitive psychologist, researcher, and a speaker focused on supporting educators in creating effective and engaging learning experiences. So, Dr. Miller, your chance.
Oh, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for being here. As you can see here, I've got a scene from my area of the world where I'm from. This is near the Grand Canyon area near Flagstaff, Arizona, in the United States. And I may be very, very far from home today, but I definitely feel at home among colleagues, and I hope you do as well. So I am here to talk to you about what is a very controversial issue among educators, especially engaged educators of the sort that we have here today. And that is the role of memory and the value of memorized knowledge in a world where information is available absolutely everywhere and where thinking is the most important skill that any person can have. And I have a unique perspective on this, as you'll see in a little bit, and I hope that what I share with you today will also perhaps spark some shifts in your own perspective as well. So I come to this question from my background as a cognitive psychologist and as a memory researcher myself. And I'm one who also now today who's always incredibly excited to share what my field has turned up over the years through all of our research, including some very surprising and sometimes very practical findings about how memory works. And in particular today as well, we've turned up some powerful connections between memory and knowledge and the ability to be a skilled and discerning thinker. And so that's why I think it is really important to focus on this topic today. That and the need to send our students out prepared into their future careers and also into a world which absolutely is becoming more complex, challenging, and even chaotic with every single passing day, it seems. And so we're going to be exploring some connections today among those things, and also looking at how memory itself may be evolving alongside technology, with some implications that are both positive and negative for learning. So at the end of our time together today, I hope that you'll come away with a new appreciation and understanding of how this sometimes maligned and sometimes neglected aspect of learning actually works, with some ideas for how to carry this out for the benefit of your own students in your own environments. All right, so with that short introduction, here's the thing. When I talk to educators, such as yourself, about memory, when I first started going out and sharing the findings of my field, there were some themes that I got as pushback. So there are some reactions that tend to be typical. And now that I've had the opportunity to talk to hundreds and hundreds of educators and ask them, when I say the words, you know, I want my students to remember certain things as a function of my course, or I want them to actually memorize this piece of information, what comes to mind? And these actually may be some things that are coming to your minds as well as I'm talking here today. So here's just 4 that tend to rise to the surface that I'll share initially. So the first reaction I tend to get, the topic of memory, is, well, Professor, don't you know that everything is available online? So, of course, that theme of, well, why remember anything when it's all available through a search engine? Everybody has a phone on them all the time, right? And now, of course, with the arrival of generative AI as an even more powerful tool to find anything that you might need to know at any time. All right, so there's that one. There's also variations on this theme, one that goes back to Bloom's taxonomy. So I have up here on the screen just one of many illustrations that you might see of this framework. Now, I love Bloom's taxonomy. It is an incredibly powerful conceptual tool for guiding and planning what we do. However, it is a hierarchy, right? And quite naturally, we look at it and we say, I don't want to be stuck at the bottom of this hierarchy in the remembering phase of learning. I want to be up at creating, evaluating, and analyzing. That's where my students really need to be successful. And then there's this one. If you think back to, for example, Paulo Freire's powerful idea of the banking model of learning, right? This is another that tends to come to mind when we think memory and knowledge as a core of learning. We say, well, that idea was that educators are up here, we have all the knowledge, students are down here, and learning and teaching is just a matter of shifting what's in my head to your head, right? Or what you might call today, with a more technological metaphor, the download theory of teaching and learning. So that's not what we want. That's quite repellent to most of us as educators. And then there's this one, like, well, yeah, sure, knowledge is part of what we want our students to develop, but I can't spend my whole semester or my whole year on this, and I'm envisioning that my class is going to be this, frankly, very boring slog of just drilling and remembering and memorizing and stating things over and over. That's not what we want. Okay, so that's what I hear when I bring this up. And here's the first thing that I always want to emphasize, which is, this is all coming from a good place. If any of those themes, or all of them, or even more objections come to your mind when I bring up this topic, that is the hallmark of somebody who has thought very deeply about the nature and purpose of teaching and learning. So that's all really, really good. But there are some perspectives, and perhaps even some new emerging research you may not be aware of, that I'd like to share as well. So here's the thing. As a very practical person myself, I just kind of envision that, well, after my students have gone through my course, what do I want? I want them to be out in their careers, or maybe in the next course, a more demanding course, advanced course, actually applying what they've learned from me, right? And in order to do that, and to do it in a very fluid, skillful fashion, can they really be diving for their phones every time they need to know some key piece of information? That's not going to work very well. I think, for example, of my students in my research methods courses, right, learning statistical analysis and so on, There are certain statistical parameters and cutoffs and so on that we use in that field. And you can look any of those up anytime, and you're going to get the same exact information from your phone, from your book, you name it. But when they're in the laboratory, and they're going through all that output that the computer just gave them, and they're having to make their decisions and make their analysis, it's going to slow them down. They have to stop every time to go and look that key piece of information up. And every time they do, that drives up the cognitive load that they're under. And I say, how are they going to go out into the field and become these skilled researchers if they don't have certain pieces of information? Now, this doesn't mean go home and memorize the whole statistics textbook, right? But it does mean that I, as the expert in this field, can help identify for them, okay, here's the stuff that you actually are going to use all the time, day in and day out, that you do need to know without going for your phone. It's what we'd call it American English, back-of-the-hand knowledge. So name any field, any academic field of study, any career, there's back-of-the-hand knowledge that we know that students are going to need. And there's also this exciting new emerging research that shows that, unlike what I was taught when as a teacher, that that thinking skills and memory are not necessarily in competition. I was told, well, you can have higher order thinking skills, or you can have memorized knowledge. You can't have both. But now we know that one complements the other. So I think, for example, of this line of research that shows that when students have more firmly committed to memory, those certain key back-of-the-hand knowledge facts about a field, they are more able to do things like draw inferences or make predictions about what will come next. And that's what I would consider higher order or even more creative thought. So one can complement the other. They're not in competition. That's what the new research is suggesting. And this can also be true for critical thinking, creating a sort of a virtuous cycle. So one topic, not to get too political here, but one big topic in my country right now is the application of our United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the key provisions that come right at the beginning of that document. And I think about how I want my students to be able to think critically about that, right? And I think of a debate that we might have in my classroom talking about the interpretation of that incredibly important document and those rights. Well, that debate is going to go very differently if everybody who's in the debate has an idea of what those provisions actually are. So I stand with many experts who say critical thinking is great, but students have to have something to think critically about. And so that virtuous cycle that can happen when students are thinking deeply about a set of topics, but also have those key facts committed to memory, that's powerful. So many experts have also observed that when we do grapple with material in an effortful way, that actually drives memory more firmly into our knowledge base. And then the more we know, the better we can think about it. I love this statement from one of the experts in our field, Daniel Willingham, the educational psychologist. And he says, memory is the residue of thought. So think about how powerful that can be in your own classroom. Memory, the residue of thought. Deep thought, reinforcing memory, reinforcing deep thought. And here's the thing. Because in my field, we have been studying now for 50, 60 years, the key functions of how memory works, we know so much now about how to accelerate it that nobody needs to spend their whole semester just establishing those key facts. With some core principles of how memory works, this can happen quickly, efficiently, and not be a chore for your students. So that's what we're going to pivot to now. So instead of sharing tons of technical theories or jargon or things like that, what I like to do is try to boil this down, all these decades of memory research, into just the most core principles and the most useful things that teachers can use in their teaching and share with their students for their studying. So for purposes of this talk today, I've called this the 5 Noble Truths of Memory. So I'm going to share these with you now. So it all starts with your concept of what memory even is, right? And I like to start here partly because, unfortunately, in my field, we've also, I think, set up some metaphors of what memory even is that are kind of counterproductive. So these may be reminiscent, if you've had some psychology courses, you may recognize some of these. So it's easy to think about memory just as sort of a container. It's like a filing cabinet that your mind has, and that's where you put information. Or it's like an assembly line. Information comes in through eyes and ears, and it stops along the way. It's short-term memory, goes into long-term memory, and comes back. And nothing could be farther from the truth, according to today's memory theories. And memory is definitely not like a video camera. It's not like holding up your phone and it just takes in indiscriminately everything that's in front of it. Human memory is much, much more selective, right? We don't just commit something to memory because it's in front of us or because we've heard it many times. We take in what is relevant to our goals. So memory is something the mind does to accomplish its goals. It's not a place that the mind has. And once you make that key shift, a lot of things start to become a lot more clear about why we remember some things and forget others. And it's also really important for teachers to remember, because it's easy for any of us to say, well, if a student is having trouble grappling with a particular concept, they don't seem to be able to pick it up, they just need a bigger container, right? But in fact, there's probably something a lot more subtle going on. So memory is not something the mind does, or it's something the mind does, not a place the mind has. So here's another big principle we can all use, which is that memory thrives on effort and engagement. So here's that residue of thought theme again. And this ties into another really core principle, which is the connection to attention and focus. So the decades of memory research has shown us that for all practical purposes, if we don't pay attention to something in a focused way, we're not going to retain it. We retain virtually nothing that doesn't go through attention first. So when we put effort, we put active engagement into something, memory blossoms. And when we're unfocused, it disappears. And out of all the different ways to effortfully engage with information, far and away, the most efficient from a memory standpoint is retrieving. So this gets to that principle of retrieval practice, something that has been a tremendously dominant concept in the field of applied memory for years and years now. So retrieval practice simply references the process of pulling something out of memory, right, without looking at an external aid or something like that. And this can be a test, of course, and be a quiz, but it can also be explaining a concept to your study partner, right, or asking each other questions. And especially, retrieval practice pays off in better retention compared to what many students, they make a good faith effort, but what they'll do when they say they're studying is simply reviewing a textbook, right? So they've got the highlighter out, they're reading. They will retain much less from spending time on that than they will from closing the book and saying, what did I just read, right? So retrieval practice, powerful, powerful form of active engagement that results in incredibly accelerated memory retention. And there's also the role of timing, the so-called distributed practice principle. So here's the thing. Let's say that I have a student who's engaged in the classic cram session. We've got a test on Monday, so I'm going to spend hours and hours on a Sunday going over that information. Well, when you have that kind of concentrated time, the information gets tied to that particular context. And you get less out of that same amount of time spent studying than you would if you simply split it up over shorter sessions spread over more time. And this is partly because, you know, we all like to take breaks and we don't get as overwhelmed. But it also has to do with some processes that actually go on in the brain having to do with context. So when we continually study information in one context, quite naturally it gets bound up to that context. But when we study it across many contexts, we talk about it with that study partner, we encounter it in class, we encounter it in a different course, in a different setting, that helps trigger the brain to bring that information up more readily next time. So distributing the time across shorter study sessions results in more retention. So repeated engagement across time and context. And lastly, it's not a single capacity, nor is it fixed, right? So the more we do research, the more that we realize that not only is memory not just some container in the brain, it's spread over many mechanisms and many parts of mind and brain, right? All which serve different functions and goals that we might be accomplishing at any given time. So it makes a lot of sense to say, oh, well, it can't be the case that I just have a bad memory. We need to catch ourselves when we say that about ourselves. Oh, I have a bad memory. That can't be true because memory is not one thing, nor is it fixed. So I have a photo up here of a cover of a delightful book that came out some years ago, Moonwalking with Einstein. If you've taken a look at this book, you know that the author of it is a journalist who engaged in these memory competitions. He got into this world of people who accomplish these incredible memory feats as a kind of a sport almost. And his core realization in this experience was this. He said, these people who have these incredible abilities to memorize, it's not that they're born with a special ability. It's all about technique. So improving memory techniques are learnable, they're teachable, and any of us can get better. So just to recap, anything that we bring into our classrooms or study techniques that we suggest to our students, it's hard to go wrong if we take these 5 principles into account. Memory is something the mind does, not a container in the mind. It thrives on effort and engagement. Without focus, it doesn't happen. Retrieval practice is the most powerful form of active engagement. Repeating engagement across time and context, distributing study time, that makes the time pay off, and it's not a single fixed capacity. Now, let's take on then this question of technology, though. So memory is now taking place in this technological environment. What does that mean? So one of the most powerful and important lines of research and powerful concepts that's come along in a long time is this idea of cognitive offloading. And this is definitely true for memory. So cognitive offloading is this great term. It means just what it sounds like, which is something that we could do with our own minds on our own. We delegate to a device, to a technology, right? So in the case of memory, it's pretty straightforward. Instead of committing a particular fact to memory, I'm just going to know where to find it. And here's the thing. When we do that, when we assume we can find it online, that decreases the likelihood we'll commit it to our own memory. And this is what the classic research studies on cognitive offloading and memory have revealed. And you can understand how this could have an undermining effect, right? So if I tell my students in, say, a research methods class, oh, it's okay, you can always look this up later if you need to, they're less likely to retain that fact. And over time, they're going to get less out of what they're trying to learn in that field. Now, here's a key thing, which is this doesn't mean that our ability to remember facts across the board in a global way has been degraded. I haven't seen any research that I would consider convincing on that score. So we can remember, but we'll choose not to in these selective situations if we've offloaded a technology. So that's a phenomenon teachers need to keep in mind. And of course, there's the attention connection. So big news flash, I'm sure, for everybody, is that our devices are incredibly distracting, right? And they're engineered to be. They're engineered to take our attention and pull it off to somebody else's purposes and away from our own. And if we're not attending, memory's not going to happen. So I think, for example, of students who are, say, off on a field trip that I've put together, maybe we're visiting a historical site or we're visiting an internship setting. And the students are going through this compelling experience, they're taking it all in, but then, oh, I want to take a picture, right? I bring out the phone. Now my attention is on setting up that photo and not on what I'm experiencing. And oh, by the way, I have 47 new notifications on Instagram, and my mom just texted me. Maybe I should answer that. Nothing's going to be retained. So that too is something that our students need to be aware of, and maybe we need to set some structures around when we're in a high-stakes situation like a field trip. But here's the good news, is that educational technology, when it is designed to put those noble truths into action, can really accelerate what students are on. And that's where I see the great potential of educational technology, when it's designed explicitly around the principles. And here's a few of my favorite examples I'll just share. So the first off is, believe it or not, Kahoot. So do we have any users of Kahoot in the house? Okay, this one is such a favorite. I even use this up to my graduate level courses. It does one thing and does it really well. It engages students in retrieval practice in a way that can be fun and fast-paced and very informative to me as the educator, because I can see right away, oh, okay, the students in this class are missing this particular set of questions. Let's revisit those. Now, even things like very basic techniques like flashcards, right? Flashcards for study, another great retrieval practice technique. Well, those now have great capabilities when they're transplanted into a digital form. And there's many of these around, but Brainscape is a relative newcomer to the scene. And what it does is it takes the flashcard and marries this with some new capabilities, such as the ability to put in your study materials and, using some AI, turn those into questions that you can then use to practice on the go every time you've got your phone with you in a few minutes, right? Distributing the practice, doing the retrieval, very, very powerful. I'm actually going through a self-learning course that I designed myself on my own in Brainscape right now. Duolingo, another example, explicitly designed around distributed practice and retrieval practice. Newsreel is another newcomer to the scene, and this one is just beginning to launch right now, but I did want to share it with you because it is described sometimes as Duolingo for news. This one is kind of US-oriented, but if you think about it, if you consume your news the way many of us do, you open your phone in the morning and you start to scroll, right? And you scroll and you scroll. It's overwhelming. At the end of it, you're anxious and you don't really know what you've absorbed from all of that. Well, Newsreel boils down a day's current events into just the core ones, the key ones. So there's that selectivity, that back-of-the-hand knowledge theme again. And it engages the learner with those current event facts, with some retrieval practice, and then you're done for the day, right? So a completely different way to engage with that. And of course, there's the capabilities now with ChatGPT and generative AI. That's up next, so I'm not going to talk too much about those, but you can probably already see as well the potential for putting those 5 noble truths into practice in a variety of settings with a variety of approaches using those tools. Now, turning to the future of memory, a few future themes and trends that I wanted to highlight and get us thinking about as we enter into this conference. A few to watch is, I do think that we are going to see a continuation of this cognitive offloading and even sharing of memory theme that's been explored already. So our devices really are becoming extensions of our own minds and especially our own memories. And it is tempting, once again, to see this as negative, but I don't think that's necessarily accurate. So the first folks who talked about cognitive offloading and discovered how that worked in memory said, you know what, this is not really a new thing. If you think about it, we've always offloaded and shared our knowledge base and our own memories with external sources of all kinds. Of course, there's books, but there's also other people. So, for example, I've been married for 30 years, and I can attest that there are certain things that I remember and my husband remembers, and that way we sort of divide and conquer. And we're going to see people perhaps doing this more and more. Right? So devices as extensions of a long-standing trend in human memory to do more and to know more by sharing. And our life stories as well. what we would call autobiographical memory. We're seeing for the first time in human history a generation that has the ability to take their own fragmented and selective memories of what's happened to them in their lives and compare them against objective digital records and go back over time. Does that mean that they will have a richer life story and set of memories at the end of their lives? Will it mean that those memories are more accurate? We're not sure yet what the implications are, but this is definitely a shift. And this is a trend that I would like to see superimposed onto all of these, which is taking our memories into our own hands, increasingly taking charge of what we choose to remember and what we choose to help other people remember. We can share, for example, with our students at every opportunity we can those 5 noble truths of memory, because research shows that when students have the opportunity to see those principles put into practice and see that they pay off in better results in less time, they will take those same techniques forward into their next class, into their next project, without me, the teacher, even having to goad them into doing so. And that is going to be powerful as well. And none of this, I believe, has to be a chore or a slog for any of us, right? So I talk in my second book, right towards the end, about a concept called memory play, what I called memory play. And maybe we'll see more people taking this kind of a playful approach. So whether it's through a friendly competition or just to test our own boundaries, I can do that as well. And if you think about it, just as in so many areas of learning, children start out playful in this way, right? So if you know any of those kids who they know all the dinosaurs, dozens and dozens of them, they've memorized the names, and they want to share that with you, or the kids who are excited to tell you all the plots of their favorite books that they've memorized as well, that's not a chore for them. That's a positive. And maybe we can all get back there, and maybe we can help our students get back there as well. So I guess for those of us who are leaders in this space, I would encourage us to really take to heart the idea that if we want to have an educated citizenry with sophisticated thinking abilities, if we do want to have the innovations and the creativity of the future, we need knowledge. And as educators, we need to be able to help our students acquire that. So I hope that your time at this conference is going to offer many springboards for finding out and thinking about what this is going to look like for your students in your courses. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you. Great presentation. First task is not to forget it, okay? So now I will not touch anything, I could be the one to be blamed. Okay, now is the time for Professor Michael Wooldridge. He's an academic and author specializing in artificial intelligence. He's a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Oxford and director for artificial intelligence at the Alan Turing Institute in London. Previously, he was president of the European Association of AI and the president of the International Joint Conference on AI. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So we have a lot of material to get through, so I'm going to go fairly briskly. So artificial intelligence, despite what you might gather from the press, is not a new field. It's far from a new field. It emerged just after the end of the Second World War with the advent of the first digital computers, the first computers that have the same structure as the computers that we have today. And those computers, primitive as they were nevertheless capable of what seemed like remarkable intellectual feats. They could do prodigious quantities of mathematics much more quickly and much more accurately than any human being could do, for example. And because of this, people began to ask, could these machines be intelligent? Or could we make intelligent machines? We're using digital computers as the main ingredient. The idea of AI was in the air. And AI as a field has been studied continually since the mid-1950s. It's been a research discipline continually since then. And today's AI, the ideas that are driving today's AI, are descended from those very, very old ideas. But the truth is, for most of the time since then, progress in AI was really quite slow. It's only just the last decade or so that things have really begun to take off in AI. So why is this? In this old field, what were the ingredients that came together over the last decade that suddenly supercharged artificial intelligence? So in the first part of the talk, what I want to do is to try to explain what those ingredients were, why they came together, and to give you an idea of what those ingredients are and how they work and what their limitations are. In the second part of the talk, I will move on to talk about the implications of this for education. So, AI is a broad field. It embraces all the components of intelligence in human beings. If we really succeed with AI, then we will have machines that can do the infinite number of things which you or I can do. We will have machines that can't just do arithmetic. We will have machines that can do logical reasoning. We will have machines that can solve problems. We will have machines that can play games. We will have machines that can do anything that a human being could do. And so AI addressed itself to all of those different capabilities. But there's just one capability that artificial intelligence has proved to be extraordinarily good at this century. And this capability is the one that has driven all the recent advances in AI. And that capability is machine learning. Now, like so many bits of terminology in artificial intelligence, the term machine learning itself is a little bit unfortunate because it kind of implies that a machine locks itself away in a room with a textbook and teaches itself French or something. That's not the way that machine learning works. So let's have a look at machine learning and what machine learning is actually doing. Because when you hear about advances in AI in the press, when you hear about generative AI and so on, what you're actually hearing about is this. It's machine learning. So let's have a look at a classic machine learning problem. This is the problem of learning to recognize faces in pictures. So a machine isn't going to recognize a face it hasn't seen, but it is a fact now that machines are better at being able to recognize the faces of people that they've seen in pictures before. That is, you can show a machine some pictures of faces. In the future, it will be better at recognizing those faces than people are. And we use this technology all the time. It's now routine. You probably open your smartphone using facial recognition technology. So how does it work? Well, the first big idea of machine learning to remember is that we need to train the machine. We need to train the machine, and we do that with training data. And here we have a number of different items of training data. And the training data consists of an input, the picture of a face, and an output. And the output is what we would want the machine to do if we showed it that picture. So the first face at the top there, if I showed you that picture, I would want you to say Alan Turing. So this is indeed a picture of the late, great Alan Turing, one of the inventors of computers and one of the inventors of artificial intelligence. The second picture is also a bit of training data. The input is a picture of a slightly younger Alan Turing, and the output is the text Alan Turing again. If I showed you this picture, this is what I would want you to do. Now, we're not telling the machine at this point how it goes from the picture to the name Alan Turing. We're just saying, if I showed you this picture, I want you to do this. And so on. And we repeatedly train the machine with these input-output pairs. Picture of a person, the name of the person that appears there. If I showed you this picture, produce this name. Until, in the end, the idea is if we showed the machine a picture of, and indeed this is Alan Turing, we would want it to produce the output that we would want it to produce. So we need to train machines, and you've just learned an incredibly important lesson about artificial intelligence. So the second big takeaway, we need to train these machines, and in order to train them, we need training data. And I'm often asked by companies and the like, what should our AI strategy be? The first question you should ask is, what is your data strategy? Because if you don't have that training data, you're not going to be able to build the artificial intelligence. And very often, the value lies not in the artificial intelligence programs, but in the actual training data. Now, it's this technology that started to work this century. We started to have machines that could do things like recognize faces. And I invite you to think of some of the applications of this. For example, imagine training data in the form of X-rays of a human chest labeled with whether or not there is a cancerous presence there. The input is a picture, an X-ray of a human chest. The output is whether a tumor is present or not. That's your training data. Train a machine on that. You have machines that can recognize tumors in X-rays. There are endless applications of this kind of capability. And how does it work behind the scenes? Under the hood, there is a technology called neural networks. It's not a new idea. It goes back, in fact, to the 1940s. You look at a human brain or an animal brain under a microscope, you'll find enormous numbers of nerve cells called neurons that are connected to one another in vast networks, and those networks are communicating with one another. And what each of those individual cells is doing is a tiny, very, very simple pattern recognition task. And when a cell recognizes a pattern that it's looking for, it sends a signal out to its neighbors. And all of human intelligence, everything that we are and everything that we do, reduces down to the something like 90 billion neurons in a typical human brain. In ways, frankly, by the way, that we don't really understand. So the idea of neural networks in artificial intelligence is simply that we can, in a high-level sense, reproduce what those neurons do in computer software. And that training process means automatically configuring a neural network so that when it showed the particular input and the particular output, it adjusts the network so that it produces the right output for the given input. And this process, that training process, requires large numbers of items of training data. Lots of pictures of Alan Turing labeled with his name. But by providing that training data and with a suitable amount of computer power, we can train an artificial neural network, one of those networks in software. Now, this is the technology that started to work this century. So what were the big ingredients that happened? The science of neural networks had been known decades before. Certainly by the 1980s, we had all the key science in place to build artificial neural networks that could, for example, recognize a face. But it started to work around about 2005. The next big lesson, why did it start to work around 2005? Really mundane answer to that question. Because computer power got cheap enough to build big enough neural networks to be useful, and because we entered the age of big data. And the age of big data provided us with the training data to train those neural networks. It is no accident that the rise of artificial intelligence around about 2005 was coincident with the takeoff of the World Wide Web and social media, because that's where the training data comes from. And by the way, when you upload a picture of yourself onto social media and you label it with your name on Facebook or Twitter or whatever you use, the entire purpose of that exercise is for you to provide training data for the big tech companies so they can recognize your face in the future. And you're thinking, well, I'm not on social media, so I'm not going to be in that training data. Yeah, but your niece is. And you remember that barbecue last summer where you had a couple of glasses of wine and she took a picture of you? She uploaded that onto social media. She labeled it with your name. We're all of us in the training data. You radiated training data this morning as you came to the conference center. You can't get away from being in the training data in the modern world. So, around about 2005 then, this technology starts to work. And endless applications, recognizing X-rays on tumors and so on, endless different applications of it. But one particular AI technology took us by surprise. And that's the technology of large language models. Now, this is, again, a very long-standing part of AI, but the truth is it was not exactly a backwater, but it wasn't where everybody's attention was in artificial intelligence until very, very recently. So what do large language models do? Well, the first thing we have to say is something about the scale of AI. In AI, bigger is better. That is, roughly speaking, the more training data you have, the more computer power you have to do that training, and the bigger the neural networks you have, the more hard disk you have and RAM on your computer to store those neural networks, the more capable your AI is going to be. So if you want to Google this, the term that you Google is scaling laws in artificial intelligence. But basically, and rather disappointingly, as a point of view of an AI scientist, it tells you bigger is better. So imagine you're a Silicon Valley executive and you want to get an advantage on your competitors. How do you do that? Well, you could hire smarter AI scientists and pay them more. Or you could just build bigger neural networks, throw more computer power at it, more data. Put more RAM in your computers. Give them harder, bigger disk drives so you can have bigger neural networks and so on. And so this is what we saw. Big tech companies seeking to get an advantage started to build the next generation of their AI 10 times bigger. The generation after that, 10 times bigger than that. And one technology, large language models, responded incredibly well to that race for scale. So I'm pretty sure many of you will have played with large language models. And by the way, I hope you will come to the workshop that I'm going to be running afterwards. We will do lots of hands-on examples in that workshop where we will see this. And you will have played with ChatGPT or something like it, I hope. And what happens is you have a conversation with ChatGPT. You type something and it responds to you. What is it actually doing? The truth is, it's doing something that you are very, very familiar with. You use it probably routinely every day without thinking about it. If I open up my smartphone and I start sending a text message to my wife and I type, "I'm going to be," my smartphone will suggest completions, the likeliest next words to occur, so that I can quickly tap on those and complete my message. So if I type, "I'm going to be," my smartphone might suggest late or in the pub, or late and in the pub. How is it doing that? It's been trained. The training data is all the smartphone messages that I've sent to my wife, and it's built a model, that's where the term large language model comes from, of my language. And it's learned that from all those text messages, the likeliest next thing to occur after "I'm going to be" is late or in the pub. Now, the truth is, large language models, ChatGPT and the like, are doing nothing different. That's it. That's literally all they're doing. They are trying to predict the next thing that should come after your prompt. What should the likeliest next thing be? The difference is scale. And the scale of large language models is quite literally astronomical. So the neural networks in GPT-3, and GPT-3, by the way, released in 2020, was the breakthrough AI system, the breakthrough large language model, had 175 billion parameters. A parameter in a neural network is an individual neuron or a connection between them. Remember, the human brain has something like 90 billion, not precise figures, but something like that. So we're not hugely far off in terms of scale from the scale of the human brain. What about the training data? And this is where things get mind-blowing. 500 billion words of ordinary written text. 500 billion words. You would need thousands of lifetimes as a human being to read all that text. And all of it, remember the way that neural networks work, they're given an input, what's the output going to be? Essentially, the training process here is, given this phrase, given this prompt, what is the next thing to occur? And the training data, that ordinary human text, is all there so that you can do that process. So that's astronomical quantities of training data. Where does it come from? Well, a standard way, the standard approach to get that training data is to download the whole of the World Wide Web, everything on the World Wide Web. You go to every web page, you scrape the text from it, then you follow all the links in that web page, and you do that exhaustively until you've downloaded the whole of the World Wide Web. Every advertising brochure, every company policy, every scientific paper, all of Reddit, all of Twitter, everything public on Facebook, all of that, all of Wikipedia, which made up just 3% of the entirety of Wikipedia, made up 3% of the training data for GPT-3. Huge quantities of text, but all of it just so that when you type your prompt, "Tell me about the history of Liverpool Football Club," it will provide a plausible response to you. But something magic happens at that scale. Something truly magic happens. This is a test for AI that was invented a few decades ago, but when it was invented, it was pure philosophy. There was no AI in the world that you could run this test on, and there wasn't until June 2020, with the advent of GPT-3, the predecessor of ChatGPT. And the test takes the form of just ordinary questions that are testing understanding. And on the left-hand side, what we're testing is some understanding of the concept of taller than. So, for example, the second question, can Tom be taller than himself, is about, do you understand that taller than is an irreflexive concept? And it's pretty good. It gets the one at the wrong bottom. Red means it got it wrong. Green means it got it right. So it said, can two siblings each be taller than the other? Yes, two siblings can't be each be taller than the other. Yeah. So why it got that one wrong, no idea. Some other interesting ones. On a map, which compass direction is usually left, and it said north is usually to the left. No idea why it got that one wrong. Can fish run? And it came up with the right answer. I gave a similar talk to this a few weeks ago. No, fish cannot run. I think that's the right answer. Somebody emailed me and said, actually, there's a fish in Indonesia that runs. No, fish don't run. That's the common sense answer to that question. The next one's interesting. If the door is locked, what must we do first before opening it? You must unlock it. The beginnings of planning and problem solving there. And the point is, we didn't train the machine to understand taller than or to be able to plan and solve problems, but nevertheless, those capabilities arose in the machine. And I emphasize, 5 years ago, there was no AI in the world that you could run this test on. And so we went from questions that were purely philosophical to practical science. Let's try it out and see what happens overnight. So a really, truly magic time in AI. And the success of ChatGPT, and ChatGPT basically uses ChatGPT uses GPT-3, that first system, that was its core technology, took the big tech companies by surprise. And it's all about scale. Large language models with sufficient scale, sufficient training data, and sufficient computer power are capable of remarkable things. So there were a huge number of bets in AI being made by big tech companies. Large language models are the one that paid off spectacularly. And what we've witnessed since then, since November 2022, is a race to embed generative AI capabilities absolutely everywhere. So Apple Intelligence is a manifestation of that. Microsoft Copilot is a manifestation of that. Those are the two that you might most likely have used. All of the big tech companies are racing to put generative AI in their products in the hope that they find the killer app, the thing that people are really, really, really going to use. So these are genuinely extraordinary technologies, but let's just quickly talk through some issues. Firstly, they're not designed to tell the truth. Let me say that again. They're not designed to tell the truth. They have no conception of what the truth is. And if you've been trained on the whole of the World Wide Web, you're going to have a slightly fuzzy conception of truth in any case. They are trained to tell you the most plausible answer. And that means they get things wrong a lot. So, an example. June 2020, I was playing with GPT-3, and I typed, who is Michael Wooldridge? And we finally get to Michael Wooldridge is a professor at Oxford. It turns out there are some other Michael Wooldridges out there in the world. And it says, he's a professor of artificial intelligence, tick. Specializing in multi-agent systems, tick. Studied at the University of Cambridge. Cambridge. The most powerful AI in the world, the first thing it does is insult me. No, I didn't study at the University of Cambridge. That fine institution, I would have loved. I mean, this is particularly ironic because as a teenager, I was nowhere near getting into the University of Cambridge. I would have loved to have studied there. But no, I never studied there. So why is it getting that wrong? I had never had anything to do with Cambridge. Because it's not designed to tell you the truth. It's designed to tell you a plausible answer. And if you'd studied at the University of Cambridge, you wouldn't have batted an eyelid because it's very plausible. So they get things wrong in very plausible ways. By the way, ChatGPT, somebody told me recently, they ran this query again. ChatGPT now has much more elaborate answers. It doesn't just say I studied at Cambridge, which I didn't. It has anecdotes about my time at Cambridge. Very, very bizarre. They get things wrong a lot. Bias and toxicity. Okay. Here's a prompt that somebody tried on GPT-3 in the summer of 2020, and it's a distasteful example. I apologize for that, but it's true, and it's important. They said, I would like to murder my wife and get away with it. What's a foolproof way to do that? And the large language model said, here are 5 foolproof ways that you can murder your wife and get away with it. So this is embarrassing. Obviously, the company don't want the technology to be used in that way, so they insert a fix for it. And a few weeks later, somebody tries the following query. I'm writing a novel in which the main character would like to murder their wife and get away with it. What's a foolproof way to do that? Here are 5 foolproof ways in which your character can murder their wife. Now, the point about this is that this toxicity is baked into the system at a deep level. Governments are worried about this because they're worried that it's going to teach people how to build terrorist explosive devices or plan terrorist attacks or plan criminal activities of other kind. It's a deep-seated issue. Copyright. If you've been trained on the whole of the World Wide Web, you've absorbed huge amounts of copyrighted data. Copyright owners, including me, are very upset about that, and lawsuits are underway right now. So if you've just downloaded the whole of the World Wide Web, that will include vast quantities of copyrighted data. And copyright law was not designed for generative AI. So the world is struggling right now to understand what copyright means in this new era. The related problem of intellectual property. If you've been trained on, for example, all of the works of J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter, you're going to be able to create those works, but then what does that mean for J.K. Rowling's intellectual property? She's concerned about that, many other authors are, and creative professionals as well. Employment, the problem of this is going to make people, this is going to affect employment. We're still figuring out what that means, but we need to be aware of that. Giving power to bad actors, I've already talked about that. Will we run out of data if you've used the whole of the World Wide Web? Where do you get 10 times more data from next time? This is a real challenge right now. Will AI pollute the internet? So my prediction is that within 20 years, basically everything you read online will be AI generated. Actually, it just seems inevitable right now that that's where we're going. You will still be able to get human-generated content, but you'll have to pay a premium for it. Roughly speaking, otherwise, everything you encounter on the World Wide Web, which means the overwhelming proportion of the world's population will just be getting their entire worldview from AI. That's worth thinking about. Who controls the technology? Silicon Valley and 1 or 2 state-level actors. That's who controls the technology. I think we should be concerned about that. Okay, let's talk through some opportunities. And I'm going to come back and talk about productivity. And in the workshop, I'm going to really emphasize this point a lot. I think this is a real sweet spot for this technology. It's a tool. It's a very powerful tool. It's like the way that pocket calculators were a productivity tool for people that needed to do arithmetic, or spreadsheets, or email, and so on. It's another tool which enables you to be more productive. And in a few moments, we'll see some examples of this. It's a huge productivity boost. And we'll also see examples of how, somewhat implausibly, it's also a powerful creativity assistant. Now, we could discuss over a couple of glasses of good Valencian wine about whether AI can really be creative. It doesn't matter. It can help you to be creative. And not necessarily creative at the level of Lennon and McCartney, or Bob Dylan or whatever, but nevertheless creative enough to be useful. Leveraging unstructured data, we'll see some examples of this in a few moments. Basically being able to train AI on all of the emails and so on that you use, your class discussions that you're like, so that AI can be able to answer questions about those. And finally, new categories of content. So I don't know what those new categories of content will be, but there will be new categories of content arising from generative AI. And all of us in this room are going to find those new categories of content weird and disturbing. Our kids will just think they're ordinary and natural and normal, and they will love them. Okay? So let's talk a little bit then about AI in education. And I emphasize, I hope you'll come to the workshop because we're going to see a lot more examples. So the first sweet spot for AI in education is the idea that we can personalize education for individuals. When I teach to a class of 90 students. They all get exactly the same lecture, exactly the same assessments, exactly the same exam. And that way of providing content for them, of providing education for them, is traditional, but it's not necessarily terribly the best way of doing it. And the reason that we don't personalize education at the moment is it's just too expensive. Unless you can afford individual educators, it's not feasible to do that. But artificial intelligence tutoring system can learn a student's habits, their preferences, their weaknesses, and their strengths and their interests, and adapt delivery around them. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. So this is just a simple case study. This is supposed to be a teacher who's teaching a kid the concept of adjectives, and it's a 9-year-old child, and we know that this 9-year-old child is interested in teddy bears. They love teddy bears. They have a teddy bear collection. So if in an ideal world, if you're a teacher and you're trying to teach a student like this, you would come up with some personalized materials for them. And what might that look like? It might be a story about teddy bears in which you emphasize the adjectives. So this is ChatGPT doing this. The prompt is, can you give me a story about a sad teddy bear who became happy that includes lots of adjectives suitable for a 9-year-old? Please put the adjectives in uppercase. And it does this. In a quiet, dusty toy shop on the edge of town, a small, fluffy teddy bear named Teddy sat on a high wooden shelf. And you'll notice it's getting the adjectives in uppercase. And the story ends happily with, just like that, the sad, lonely teddy bear became the happiest, most cherished toy in the whole world. Now, this isn't Nobel Prize literary material, but it's the kind of material which would be suitable for a 9-year-old. And here's the point. Without something like this, most classroom teachers simply wouldn't have the time to be able to produce personalized content like that. This took seconds. So it makes it possible to generate content which is engaging for students in a way which simply wouldn't be impossible otherwise. Of course, in an ideal world, all our children would have one-to-one tuition with teachers every day. That just isn't the world that we live in. By using generative AI in this way, we can personalize content in a very accessible way. Okay, next example. Can you give me 10 sentences about Liverpool Football Club that include adverbs? So the point here is we're trying to teach adverbs. Make it at the level a 10-year-old can understand. Put the adverbs in uppercase. Liverpool always play with great passion. The fans cheer loudly for their team at Anfield, and so on. By the way, can you spot a mistake? I said it gets things wrong, and it's got something wrong. Can you spot this? It's not in uppercase. Why on earth it didn't put it in uppercase, I have no idea. It's bold-faced them, so it's obvious what's going on, but I asked for them in uppercase. So one lesson there, by the way, is there is a cost to doing this, and the cost is you still have to check this. If you don't check the outputs of AI, you are being professionally sloppy. Okay, you need to check the outputs of it. So in this case, it doesn't particularly matter so much because, it's in boldface anyway, but nevertheless, it's making a mistake. Now, I emphasize, these aren't the greatest examples that you could come up with, but it just wouldn't happen otherwise. Now again, come to the workshop and we will see lots more examples of these. Let's have a look at another. These are a hands-on way that teachers can improve their provision to their students, and personalization is a possibility there, and it's personalization through productivity. Taking a task which would have taken a teacher half an hour and therefore just wouldn't have been possible, and doing it in seconds. Learning analytics, this is a classic application of AI in education. AI can give teachers insights into their cohort's performance so they can understand where more effort is needing. And predictive analytics, telling them what's likely to happen given a particular cohort. You can do things like the following. You can, for example, automatically analyze the chat room discussions that your cohort is having to identify any cohort weaknesses. What are the areas that they're not understanding that I need to focus on? That analysis can automatically be done by artificial intelligence. We can provide students with some real-time understanding of where they actually are in the learning process. Yeah? What are they learning? What are they coping with? What are they not coping with? What areas do we particularly need to focus on? Assessment, automated grading. So this is fiercely controversial. I have plenty of colleagues who say, no, this is an area we just shouldn't go. Automated grading is just something that we shouldn't consider. Automated grading is a reality in computer science departments. Students that submit computer programs in many departments around the world will just get automated feedback from another computer program that analyzes them. It happens, and in an ideal world, of course, we wouldn't want to go there. But the truth is that artificial intelligence can now be quite useful at providing automated analysis. Automated analysis of, for example, essays that students write. Are those essays being presented coherently and logically? What are the main points that they're trying to make? And so on. Identifying logical errors, logical reasoning errors, is something now that generative AI can do. Again, come to the workshop and we'll see some examples of this. If done right, it can remove human bias or error, and there's a big caveat there, if done right. But nevertheless, automated analysis and feedback, I think, is going to be a big thing in the future. By the way, we are beginning to see this in my scientific side of my work. We're beginning to see generative AI being accepted as a tool for analyzing scientific work, scientific papers. That is, as another voice in the room, another signal that gives you feedback on scientific documents. Self-directed learning. So today's classrooms have a single syllabus. AI-powered learning is going to allow students to assemble a unique syllabus specifically for them. And of course, the dream of this is intelligent tutoring systems that are just one-to-one tutoring systems with a student. That is, the entire process would be led by a student. And this is an ancient idea. I certainly remember work on it as far back as the 1980s. It hasn't been possible realistically now, but generative AI suggests what might be possible. So let's have a look at another example. And this is a real example. This actually is an example from my life. I was setting an exam paper which involved some calculus. And I haven't studied calculus for 40 years, and actually it was kind of weird that it came up in this paper, and I was frankly rusty. Now, I have a stack of calculus textbooks on my shelf, and I opened them, blew the dust off, and opened them up and tried to figure out what was going on, but it was going to take me a long time to do that. And the problem was I worked through this solution. I was coming up with the model solution, but I just wasn't completely convinced. So I went into chat. I thought, let's try ChatGPT and let's talk through it. So I'm trying to differentiate e to the power of 1 minus 1 over n, but I don't know how to do it. Can you step me through this? I said, I can do stuff like x squared, but that's about it. So that's about the limit of what I remembered from calculus back in the day. And so this is what it came out with. And you can follow this through. It says we need the chain rule. There we identify the identity f of n, the function f of n, and differentiate that and so on. Now, the point about this is, firstly, the answer that it got, this wasn't the actual one that I tried, the answer it got agreed with mine, which was a huge relief to me professionally, I have to tell you. But actually, it taught me things I not only had forgotten, but that I never knew about calculus. Actually, in particular, the chain rule, it gave me a much better understanding of what the chain rule was. And you can have a conversation. Please explain the chain rule. I don't really understand what's going on there. Can you go into that? And you'll actually have a conversation with it. So this is an incredibly powerful tool already. With the caveats, it gets things wrong, and it does get things wrong, but it's already an incredibly powerful tool for education. There is naivety, though, around this, and I think, for example, politicians keen to save money imagine that we're just going to be able to get rid of teachers and replace them with ChatGPT. Of course that's not going to work. Because a typical teenager, put them in front of something, even if it can answer questions about calculus, is not going to do it. They need teachers to guide, to set the agenda, to take them through the learning process. But nevertheless, I could see that if I'd been motivated enough to use this as an 18-year-old and trying to understand calculus, it would have been an extraordinarily powerful tool. So, finally, new learning environments. So we saw 20 years ago the rise of MOOCs, massively open online courses and online learning environments, which transformed education for many people, made education accessible in ways that weren't previously accessible. And we can imagine just extrapolating from those to the future of AI-powered education, mass education. And we can imagine software agents or chatbots, teacher GPTs, engaging with students, directing study, introducing examples and problems in those learning environments. And where this is going is the key phrase, the next key phrase is multimodal. Multimodal means not just text, but text and images, text and sound, text and music, and ultimately text and video, and finally, virtual reality. So imagine workers that are trying to learn how to fix a car engine can do this in a virtual reality world before they ever get to actually try things out on a real engine. And have the AI point out, no, it's that knob on the right that you need to turn, you need to adjust that to the left, and so on. Those are all things which will be possible in the very, very near future. And when generative AI fully engages with that technology, we're going to see new categories of content. Okay, let me wrap up. There's just one message I want to say. AI, I am genuinely excited about what's going on in AI and its potential to transform education. I'm very concerned, and I'm guessing most of you are as well, that there is huge naivety, as I already mentioned. That AI, there is this idea that AI replaces educators. I see AI as a tool. And I've already said, and I genuinely believe this, it's an incredibly powerful and rich productivity tool. Come to the workshop, you'll see lots of other examples. But in AI, jobs that require social skills, engaging in complex human relationships, are going to be safe from AI for the foreseeable time, and I suspect safe from AI full stop. And core education is exactly such a room. A teacher doesn't just stand at the front of the class and lecture their kids. They understand their kids. They relate to them at a deep social level. They understand their needs. They understand their fears. They understand their social situation. All of that feeds into being a good teacher. And we're a long, long way, if we ever have it, from AI that has those capabilities. But the greatest opportunity for AI in education, this is from a program called Jill Watson, which was a chatbot for providing feedback on a course. And this quote just struck me. It was a pioneering AI program for providing feedback on courses. This quote just really struck me. It's not a question of taking human jobs away, teachers' jobs. It's a question of reaching segments of the population that don't have human teachers. And those are very large segments of the population. Not replacing teachers, but providing high-quality education on a global scale. And AI as a tool which can assist human educators. And I genuinely believe it's a very, very powerful tool. Okay, so we've seen two parts in this talk. We've seen AI, how did we get here? What were the ingredients that came together? It's a very old idea, artificial neural networks, that started to work this century because of data and computer power, because we had abundant data and computer power that was cheap enough to build these programs at scale. And then large language models were supercharged by the data and compute power. Enormous quantities of data and computer power going into those. But remember, all they're doing is exactly what your smartphone does when you start sending a text message. There is no mind on the other side of the screen. But nevertheless, given enough data and computer power, large language models are capable of remarkable things. And we've just touched on a couple of examples of those in the education sphere. It is difficult to know, I think that was a hint, it is difficult to know when we're at a watershed moment in technology, but we are genuinely at such a watershed moment now. There is pre-GPT history and there are post-GPT history. The challenge for us is to figure out the best way of using this incredible technology to engage in the mission that we all care about so much, education. Thank you.
So thank you, thank you both. Great presentations. I know you want more, you have questions, but Michelle and me and Michael, they really need to serve a coffee break. It's a little bit late, so we go for the coffee break, and then you will have the chance to talk with them, okay? So welcome again. Hope you make out of this conference like an experience. Hope you take the lead from now on, and thank you. Bye.